Okay, and it's 1 o'clock. So here we go. Good afternoon and welcome to the second Saturday seminar series. I'm Susan Jones here at the Animas Museum, along with Charles D. Fernando, Carolyn Bauer, and Gay Keene. This past June was the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and that's why we've chosen this year to look at La Plata County's role in World War II. We've had webinars, and you can access those on our recordings on our website. History La Plata this year was all about World War II in La Plata County. We opened our latest exhibit, Front Lines to Home Front, in the main gallery. So we felt it was only fitting that our December webinar look at Christmas 1944, 80 years ago. That Christmas saw residents of La Plata County serving in the military and in civilian wartime jobs around the world. While there was a longing for peace and hope that families would soon be reunited, the holidays were still celebrated. Rationing may have changed the recipes, but cookies and fruitcakes were baked and children looked forward to a visit from St. Nick. Before we jump in, as usual, some quick Zoom housekeeping. We're using Zoom's webinar feature, which means that you're all muted and your videos are all off. At the bottom of your screen, and you may need to mouse down to see it, there are a couple icons. To minimize distractions today, we have disabled the chat function. But if you have an immediate issue or question, please click on the Q&A icon. We'll monitor that. And at the end of the talk, we'll open up for questions. You can either type them into the Q&A at any time and we'll answer them at the end, or at the end, you can click the little hand and we'll allow you to unmute and ask your question. If you're in the classroom today, please hold your questions. And once we answer all the online questions, we'll come downstairs and have some Christmas cheer and answer any questions in person. We'll post any questions or discussion in the show notes so nobody will miss anything. This session is being recorded and you'll receive an email in 24 hours with a link to the recording and any other links that we talk about. With that, let's go back to 1944. The Christmas of 1944 was the third Christmas that Americans were to celebrate at war after the December 7th, 1941 bombing of Pearl Harbor. In 1941, patriotic fervor was high, but rationing hadn't started. It didn't start until January 1942, so Christmas went on sort of as usual. But by 1944, people were longing for the end of the war, and as we might say today, they were over it. The end of the war was near. However, we know that with hindsight, they didn't know that. And this is a cover of a kind of generic Christmas card that was made that year that people in the service could use to send to their families. At the time, to some people, it looked like Germany couldn't hold out for much longer. But the news in December 1944 from Europe was actually pretty bad. These Durango Herald Democrat headlines are from December 18th, 19th, and 20th in 1944. General Eisenhower lost 5 pounds in a bet that he had with Field Marshal Montgomery. Eisenhower predicted that Germany would be defeated by Christmas. It wasn't. And Germany was throwing the last of its resources, old men and young boys, at the exhausted American forces in the Ardennes forest. Catching the Americans by surprise, the Germans plowed through Allied lines for 70 miles. This offensive would later be called the Battle of the Bulge. The offensive lasted until January 25th, when finally the Germans were pushed back, not able to cross the Meuse River. It was what one military historian called the largest and most barbaric battle of the entire Western Front. To make things worse, the winter of 1944-1945 was one of the coldest and snowiest in memory worldwide, not just in La Plata County, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Fighting went on in the cold and the snow. Lieutenant Helen Aspis, a nurse from La Plata County working in a mobile hospital on the front in France during the battle, talked about having to learn quickly to treat pneumonia and frostbite. In the Pacific Theater, the news wasn't much better. At the time, high-level officials believed the U.S. would eventually win, but it would take at least 5 more years. Perhaps they didn't know or couldn't divulge the top-secret Manhattan Project building the atomic bomb that was going on. But today, we're going to talk about how, in the midst of the war, the people of La Plata County celebrated Christmas.
Hello, everyone. Here's some messages from Santa. I'm going to talk about some of the people who were serving in the military. The Durango News published letters and correspondence from different people scattered all over the world. And the 1944 papers were full. There were some very sad things. Of course, there were servicemen who were prisoners of war. One of them was a man by the name of Raymond Van Camp from Durango. He had been in the Philippines and was part of the Bataan Death March. He had been a prisoner of war for 17 months. By the time Christmas rolled around in 1944, his parents lived in the Durango area. Both of them were military. They had been in the military in World War I. His father in the Army and his mother was an Army nurse. So this was bitter news for them. They had found out that he was a prisoner of war. They sent him a package, but they had not heard from him for 17 months. They finally did receive correspondence. It was not believed that it was actually from him, but he did survive the internment camp and returned to the United States. In 1950, he was going to Fort Lewis College and was living in the vet village out there and so forth. So if you had a family member that was a prisoner of war, the United States Postal Service, you could obtain an airmail card from them that you could send postage free. And that was published also in the local newspaper, so people were aware of that. Another prisoner of war was Cecil R. Hurst, and he had been taken prisoner during the Battle of the Bulge, actually probably on Christmas Eve of 44. And later he was found out that he was used for forced labor to repair railroads. They did not have proper winter clothing. He suffered severe frostbite to his feet, and but he did survive. On a sadder note, a member of the Ute tribe, Wilbur K. Washington, was killed in action in Italy on December the 18th, and his family was notified. He worked in an ordnance battalion, and earlier he had rescued some fellow soldiers and received a citation for that, but he did not survive. On a lighter note, Wally Mollett was released from his Navy service after 3 years of service. He had served in World War I and re-enlisted at the outbreak of World War II, and he came back to Durango to his wife, who was working as a nurse locally. There was an interesting sort of funny letter from a Melvin Holt, who was in the service in Italy, and he writes to his dad. He said, these darned girls over here all ride bicycles and wear no pants, and all the GIs have eye trouble from the strain. Anyway, he put a little, but he did say he's really missed being home for Christmas and so forth. So anyway, Jim Bowra was assigned to a victory ship. He happened to be in Australia on Christmas Eve of 1944 and received Christmas mail and so forth. Liberty ships were very important, bringing supplies around the world. We have another soldier. His name was Sergeant Gimdi Lee. He was Chinese from Durango. His parents had the Mandarin Cafe, and he was assigned to India. So people from this area were scattered all over the world. his mother, Lee Soon, was selling Chinese art Christmas cards to benefit the Chinese Women's Relief Association. You have to remember the United States was allied with China during World War II. Um, Another local guy, Curtis King, who was from Breen. His parents were from Breen. He was in the 8th Air Force. He received commendations. He was a tail gunner. Um, Jackson Clark, Lieutenant Jackson Clark, was in the Battle of the Bulge in 1944. He survived also. Um, on early in Christmas, we had a note in the paper about Neil Short, who was 18 years old. He became the 6th son in his family to enlist in the service. And this picture shows him with his mom and dad. He was probably home on furlough after basic training. Let's go to the next slide. Someone else local who was serving. This is a picture of Merle Cornelius on his wedding day. He's standing with his wife, Barbara Goodman, and his brother-in-law, Walter Goodman, and his wife and their twin sons and other family members. They were married on April the 24th of 1944, and he was in Europe by Christmas of 1944. His brother, Hugh Cornelius, was in the Marine Air Corps serving in the Pacific and had been shot down and was a prisoner of war at Rabaul, New Britain. What they didn't know is that he was reported missing in action. Then they found out that he was a prisoner of war, but he died of pneumonia before being liberated. Let's go to the next. V-mail was a new way to communicate with your members, service members around the world. It was a new system. You were limited on how many characters you could write. They did not actually receive this. It went to a processing center where they were microfilmed, and the soldiers actually received a microfilm copy. So there was all kinds of rules going on to tell you how to do it and how not to do it, etc. And I have the text of one of these V-mails that was written from Merle Cornelius home to his mother-in-law, and I'll just read it. It's addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Ray Goodman in Durango. It says, "Dear Ray and Edna, I received your package yesterday, and of course I couldn't wait until Christmas to open it. Any day I receive something from home is Christmas. Anyway, so everything is okay. I surely enjoyed the things that you sent. Got a mild buzz out of the fruitcake because I remember you putting in brandy or something on it. We had a little champagne too that we picked up in Belgium to wash it down, but that had nothing to do with it. I hope that that wife of mine isn't giving you too much trouble, and I'll just leave it at that. But these emails were received by many people. It was a faster way to get correspondence from your family members. There was another V-mail sent from Major Charles Mason to some people here in Durango. He was serving in Europe as a surgeon. Major Mason acknowledges that he got a Christmas package, and he was very happy to receive that, etc. Of course, he came back to Durango and practiced medicine. There was a young man from Shiprock, a Navajo, named John Chi, who was home on furlough. That was put in the paper. He was visiting friends in Durango. And along with that, they mentioned that many Navajos were traveling through Durango on their way to Denver to get involved in wartime work in defense factories in Denver. And one of the spokesmen of one of those parties passing through town said, "Our boys go to fight, we go to work so that they have something to fight with." Let's go to the next slide. So Walter Goodman, the brother-in-law of Merle Cornelius, by Christmas of 1944, he was in France. He was part of a supply. He worked in a supply depot, and this picture is their camp at that depot. There was a letter home called Christmas in Strange Settings, and this was from Lieutenant Albert Gibbs, and he was at a base in France with the 9th Air Force. He mentions that they had a delicious turkey dinner, and the day before Christmas, each squadron entertained a group of French orphans and presented each child with a gift and miscellaneous treats. So people were celebrating all of the world, even though the war was not going very well. Something else we need to remember is that here in Colorado, we had a Japanese internment camp for Japanese citizens who were rounded up in California and sent here. They also were celebrating Christmas. They were at Amache, and they had a newspaper, and they had over 725 of their sons were serving in the military at that time. They published an honor roll weekly. And right at this time, the Supreme Court had made a ruling against the internment camps, and they were announcing that people in the internment camps were going to be released, but nobody knew quite how this was all going to happen. And so they were going to celebrate in the internment camp. And any soldier coming home to visit family had to spend their furlough in the internment camp. They were not free to move about. So I'm going to leave it at that. And thank you.
Yeah, meanwhile, back in the United States, a very important thing was happening.
After World War I, the U.S. merchant fleet was aging and in decline. Efforts to rebuild the fleet increased with the beginning of World War II. Ships to move supplies and troops were in critical demand. The solution was a mass-produced vessel. The ship's official name was the Liberty Ship. But submarines, especially the deadly German U-boats, took their toll on Liberty ships. There was a need for larger cargo capabilities aboard a faster ship. The Victory Ship program began in 1943 to meet those needs. It was also believed that the Victory Ship would be critical to shipping after the war. Victory ships, like the Liberty ships before them, were outfitted as troop carriers, hospital ships, prisoner of war transport ships, and tankers, in addition to cargo operations. They served in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans and were crewed by 62 merchant marines and 28 armed guards, who were Navy sailors who provided security, defense, and communications. Victory ships tended to be named after cities or towns and universities or colleges. Durango was honored to have a ship named for her. There was a campaign to collect books for the ship library, and with donations collected at the Durango Public Library. Other recreational supplies, such as games, were collected at the City Hall. The SS Durango Victory, hull number 549, was built at the Permanente Metals Corporation Richmond Yard in California. The keel was laid on October 17th, 1944, with the launch scheduled for December, a swift 78 days. The picture that you're looking at here is actually of the SS Red Oak Victory, but because all of the Victory ships were built on along the same plan, literally once you've seen one Victory ship, you've seen them all. But due to wartime shortages, officials from Durango were not able to travel to California for the launch. Durango native Mrs. Ella Burkheimer was living in San Diego and volunteered to represent Durango at the launch at her own expense. She was accompanied by Private Alma Stransky, who was stationed in San Diego, as she attended boot camp for the U.S. Women's Marine Reserves. Mrs. Florence Wilson Netherton, formerly of Durango, was also in the group, and she too sent an account of the launch, which mentioned several other former Durango residents living in California who were in attendance. On December 14th, Mayor Funkhauser was interviewed on the phone by the shipyard's public relations officer. The mayor provided information about Durango's economy, area attractions, and climate. The launch of the SS Durango Victory was scheduled for December 15th, 1944. At the last moment, the mayor received a telegram that the launch would be postponed until 1 o'clock on Saturday, December 16th. There was a bit of fear that it might even have to be postponed until Monday. But Ella made the case that many former Durangoans had made the trip and Private Stransky had limited leave time. So fortunately, the launch was cleared for Saturday. On Friday, the group received a tour of San Francisco in a limousine and were granted special admission to sites not generally available to the public. On launch day, Mrs. Burkheimer's party was greeted at the shipyard by company officials. The shipyard was bustling with activity, and the SS Durango towered over it all. A platform with a brightly colored canopy was placed at the front of the ship. Ella climbed some 20 to 30 steps to the canopy. As the sponsor of the ship, as the christener is called, she was accompanied by her daughter, serving as matron of honor. The ladies sported orchid corsages. The launch itself was precisely timed, with Ella receiving her instructions and given a chance to practice with the ribbon-wrapped champagne bottle. Photographers capturing the festivities added to the excitement. The ceremony was precisely timed when shipyard officials began their remarks at 12:43. They noted the ship was the 631st vessel built by the men and women of the 4 shipyards at Richmond. At 12:44, he introduced the Harmonettes, a chorus of young women sporting red and white uniforms. The official speeches continued, as Mr. Van der Wende noted. In the name-giving ceremony for this Victory cargo vessel, the 6,000 citizens of Durango, Colorado, are being honored by the United States Maritime Commission and her builders. He then gave a brief history of Durango, the economy, an overview of local attractions, and the mayor must have briefed him very thoroughly. A telegram from Mayor Funkhauser was read, concluding with the sentiment that we wish her to be a safe and happy ship, always returning to her home port unharmed. Ella was presented with 24 red roses, while her matron of honor, her daughter Mrs. Brown, was presented with 24 pink roses by a flower girl who was a shipyard secretary hailing from Salida. At 12:57, the Harmonettes sang another number, followed by an invocation by the Navy chaplain. At 12:59 and a half, the buzzer signaled 30 seconds to launch as the timbers were removed from under the ship. Mrs. Burkheimer was handed the champagne bottle. Let's listen to Ella's actual words.
10 seconds to go, and our sponsor will christen the ship.
I christen thee the SS Durango Victory.
There you go.
And that's probably enough from the Harmonettes. Thank you, ladies. As the ship slid into the water, the crowd cheered. Immediately, a group of small boats began maneuvering her to another berth to be finished. Ella was impressed by the precision and noticed that it was easy to see how they produced so many ships so quickly. The group then celebrated at a luncheon with further entertainment by the Harmonettes, followed by a tour of the shipyard. Mrs. Berkheimer reported to the mayor and the newspaper and the community that the SS Durango was successfully launched. She reported, "Well, she is in the water. Here's to the SS Durango victory." And she noted that the ship would no doubt put Durango on the map. Ella reflected the pride residents felt in having a ship named for their town, referring to the ship as our SS Durango Victory. Sea trials for the SS Durango began on January 4th, when the ship's clocks were sent to Pacific wartime and full testing of all systems. It was turned over to the United States Maritime Commission by Permanente Metals Corporation. And as a quick PS, the SS Durango Victory survived the war, but was scrapped in 1994.
And meanwhile, back in Durango, those who couldn't get to California for the launch, which is most of Durango, were preparing to celebrate. The journalism class at Fort Lewis started a radio program in conjunction with KIUP. The Presbyterian ladies had a turkey dinner and a bazaar on December 1st. There was such a huge turnout that they ran out of food. The telephone operators even had a potluck turkey dinner on December 3rd. The Christmas party for the altar and rosary guilds at St. Columba's was held on December 6th. It featured decorations, refreshments, and gifts. The Girl Scouts had a tea on the same day where carols were sung and holiday poems were read. Now, on November 9th, a big Army-Navy parade featuring the Durango High School Band started at the Strader Hotel and marched over to Smiley Junior High, where a military manpower demonstration and a chemical warfare exhibit took place. They also showed the movie, The Birth of the B-59. That same day, St. Martha's Guild of St. Mark's Church held a bazaar. Just like St. Mark's Church holds a Christmas bazaar today, although in 1944, it was held at Jackson Hardware over on Main Avenue. Now, a whole lot happened after that on December 11th. Let's see, the Chamber of Commerce had a dinner party at the Strader. The Elks ladies had a luncheon, followed by their traditional gift exchange on that day in the Elks Club room. The Neo-Delphians had dessert at Mrs. Lester Garden Schwartz's house at 8 p.m. that evening, and the Animas City PTA met that day here at the Animas City School, now the Animas Museum. On December 12th, the American Legion had a party. It keeps going on and on. They held their party at the Masonic Lodge because at the time, the American Legion didn't have the building that they have today. The Garden Club had a Christmas party on December 13th. At 2 p.m. at Westminster Hall of the Presbyterian Church. The Reading Club met on December 15th at Mrs. Frank Daniels' house. We know her as Helen Sloan Daniels. They had their Christmas party where they sang "O Little Town of Bethlehem" and "Santa Claus is Coming to Town." The Lions Club had their party on December 22nd at the Strader, and Santa showed up and distributed various and unique gifts. And that's just a sampling of some of the activities that were going on by a lot of the organizations that are still here today, and the people that you might still recognize their names. At the same time, the 6th War Bond Drive was underway. On the 4th of December, La Plata County was behind in its goals, but donations kind of spurted ahead on Pearl Harbor Day. So by December 15th, La Plata County bond purchases went over $500,000. The quota was $475,000. That just is an absolutely amazing number for our little county. During the war, you could purchase a $25 bond for $18.75 that would mature in 10 years. A lot of people would buy stamps. You could buy 10-cent stamps at a time, and you'd put them in a book, and when you filled the book, you added a nickel to buy your bond. And that's how a lot of children would save up to buy war bonds and support the war effort. La Plata County's response was pretty amazing. And some people say that's why the SS Durango Victory was named for our town. Now, during the war, there wasn't a whole lot of sports going on, especially in the winter. But the Durango High School basketball team was going strong under the leadership of Coach Kinky Peters. They beat Silverton 50-9. Sorry. Even though Coach Peters played everybody on the team. Go Demons. But two sports that were available, kind of surprisingly, perhaps. Remember I mentioned that winter of 1944 to 45 was one of the coldest and snowiest in memory? On December 12th, a major snowstorm blanketed the nation. DNRGW engineer James Conner reported record amounts of snow on top of Cumbres Pass. And that year, the Animas River froze, and people could ice skate on the river. Yeah, this picture was taken just above Animas City. Skating enthusiasts weren't the only ones that were happy this year. 1944 was actually a pivotal year for skiing in Durango. So in the late 1930s, some of the enthusiastic locals started skiing up at what they called Cascade Meadows. They rigged up an old car for a rope tow and used it up there in 1937 and 1938. And that's the picture on the left. Now, the next year, they founded the San Juan Ski Club, and they took that tow and they moved it to Lechner's Field. That was later known as Chipmunk Hill. And that's the picture in the middle. But many of the early skiers, including Ballaghers, Yeagers, the Mattis brothers, Hogans, Turners, Wigtons, Clarks, even the mayor of Durango enlisted once the war was started. So the ski club was disbanded in late 1941. Then tire and gas rationing went into effect in January 1942. So even getting to Chipmunk Hill was a problem. Nobody had the gas or the tires to spare. In 1943, the city of Durango purchased that tow from the ski club, and they moved it to the 3rd Avenue Ski Hill, later called Calico Hill, and even later, as we know it today, Chapman Hill. Now, it took a while before they got it all functioning. They had to clear the area and put in the tow, and then Western Colorado Power came along and helped with lights. And finally, around Christmas 1944 was when the 3rd Avenue Ski Hill finally opened. And that's the picture on the right, although this picture is later. I think the rope tow, we believe, really just kind of went on the lower part of that slope before it gets kind of steep like it does today. The Herald Democrat reported on January 3rd, 1945, that the ski tow was in operation, although the final hours and days weren't set yet. That night, they held a vote to decide what they were going to be. It was going to be open 2 or 3 days, nights a week. Remember, it had lights from Western Colorado Power, and all day on Sunday. Although anybody could walk up and ski anytime. The tow wasn't running, but if you felt like walking, you could do it. That tow was there until 1954, 1955, when Dolph Coos arrived, and he was absolutely horrified at the state of the tow. And he was the one who brought the new tow from Camp Hale, where the 10th Mountain Division troops had trained. So there's another World War II connection for us in Durango. Now, this is really a quick overview of the history of skiing in Durango. If you do want to know more, Robert McDaniel's wonderful talk, Longboards and Rope Tows, is available and recorded on our website. So let's take a look at what was going on in people's homes, and talking decorations and presents and food and all that kind of good stuff.
Christmas was simpler. One of the things I noticed in doing the research for this webinar was that there were very few ads actually centering on Christmas decorations, trees, and even on gifts in 1944. The only pages of decorations I found were either in the Sears Christmas Wish Book of 1944 or the Ward's catalog. There didn't seem to be the huge commercialization of Christmas as we have become accustomed to. Christmas trees were harder to obtain due to labor shortages and shipping priorities, but were still available in many communities. I imagine in this area, people did go cut a Christmas tree, but with only 4 gallons of gas a month, they didn't go far. Now, Hermosa Nurseries and Floral Company did have an ad for Christmas trees that you could go buy. Next. 1941, when the United States entered World War II, had a devastating effect on the manufacture of Christmas lights. As the need for war materials grew, most American companies turned their production lines to whatever they could make that would help the war effort. Metals of all types were in short supply, and as a result, no electric Christmas lighting outfits were made during the war years. Old strings that were already in a warehouse were sold for as long as the stock lasted. After that, Americans had to make their old sets last a few years longer, just as they had to do during the years of Depression. You know, in this Sears ad, you will see a few ornaments offered. Now, to cover the shortage of glass ornaments, which were no longer coming from Germany and Poland after 1938, the Corning Glass Company started to produce round, clear glass balls that were blown automatically by machine rather than hand blown by mouth as their European counterparts had been. Corning produced these new American-made ornaments 24 hours a day, and by 1944, they were making 40 million round glass ornaments per year. Corning then sold these glass blanks to other companies such as Shiny Bright, who in turn decorated, capped, boxed, and resold finished Christmas ornaments to retail stores nationwide. From 1939 through 1941, the ornaments were shiny, thanks to being coated on their interior with a silver nitrate solution. These shiny glass balls were often decorated with painted stripes, with red, white, and blue becoming favorite colors, and topped with metal caps embossed with "Made in the US of A." The silver nitrate solution was declared to be non-essential by the War Protection Board, and the manufacturing of it stopped. By 1942, American ornaments were being produced without any shiny look. To compensate, some companies actually put a sprig of silver-colored tinsel inside the ornaments to get that familiar sparkle that the public was used to. Soon, even the silver tinsel was used up and ornaments were left without any inside decoration. Around 1943, all metal was needed for the war effort, and the ornament industry could no longer produce metal caps for their glass or decorations. You can see here that the companies became creative, and they started using caps made out of either cardboard or paper, and with a piece of cord in place. Some companies used a cardboard hanging hook, as you can see in this red, white, and blue one that fastened inside the ball. Other decorating companies were forced to use a little piece of wood stuck sideways in the neck of the ball with a cord tied to it. Here is an example of a few homemade ornaments one can make with these instructions that appeared in a 1943 newspaper. Homemade decorations are not exactly bursting the archives of museum collections. There are several reasons. Even though a wealth of Christmas decorations have been made through the years, it is mainly the decorations bought in shops that have been held onto. These have been regarded by the owners as being more valuable and is also more likely to survive from Christmas after Christmas. Bought decorations were seldom made of fragile paper, inferior glue, and tinsel that fell apart. Finally, with the end of World War II in 1945, wartime decorations were made available as material restrictions were relaxed, and the more standard Christmas tree ornaments were again being produced in 1946, but still with the phrase "Made in the USA" embossed on the caps.
And Christmas presents.
As thoughts turned to Christmas shopping, one of the first tasks was gift for loved ones overseas. This ad from the Sears and Roebuck catalog was in the fall 1944 edition. Shoppers were reminded that this would be their best bet for holiday ordering, as the big Christmas wish book would not be published in time to meet military mailing deadlines. Newspaper articles recommended gifts of food for those away from home. Cookies and canned treats were particularly appreciated. Beyond that, the rule of thumb was something to use and then something to amuse. As to shopping for folks at home, the Ignacio Chieftain Bayfield Blade warned in mid-November that toy selections would be limited, with more wood and fewer paperboard items available. After several years of wartime shopping, a trend away from military toys was forecast, with a turn to construction and farm toys, along with housekeeping and educational toys. Dolls were expected to be in short supply, with even greater shortages of metal toys. Although, strangely, toy cast iron cookware was expected to be available after disappearing from the marketplace. Metal toy cars were simply not available, nor were new electric trains, although some replacement track could be found. Bikes, wagons, and sleds with steel runners were scarce, although used pre-war models were occasionally available. One bright spot, teddy bears were forecast to be in plentiful supply. Toy manufacturers had shifted production to war materials. For example, percussion cap factories had switched to torpedoes and shells. Some 200 toy manufacturers had switched to doing primarily war production work, while some did continue to make toys on the side, but often with partly skilled labor. Consumers were further warned that some toy manufacturers were new to the marketplace and might be offering poor quality goods. Price gouging was not expected to be a problem, as the Office of Price Administration had set ceiling prices for toys. The Durango newspaper reported that holiday spending was returning to pre-Depression levels, even though parents were not happy with the wood and pasteboard toys available. Family games were popular due to the wartime necessity to stay home and like it. Even though many games were sent to servicemen and women overseas, an ample supply of games was anticipated. Older classic games such as Rook, Pit, Flinch, and Monopoly were still popular. Sorry was popular in England during the Blitz and was proving to be popular in the States as well. Word games, military strategy games, and crossword/lexicon games were promising fun for all ages. Gifts for adults were also impacted by wartime shortages. China and goods from scrap plastic were available. There were some clothing shortages, but good selections were anticipated, and practical gifts were popular for young and old alike. And you can see here, this page from the catalog proudly proclaims that these slippers are not rationed. Sweaters, robes, non-ration slippers, and scarves were excellent choices, along with lingerie for women and neckties for men. Shoppers were urged to shop early for the best selection. A Durango Herald Democrat headline said that Santa to come to Durango despite wartime. Merchants vowed that if it is attainable at all, we will get it. But no gift advice was complete without a reminder that war bonds made an excellent gift. And perhaps that was a very good idea, considering some of the fashion that was available at the time.
And Christmas dinner, of course.
The war had been going on for years, and people had started making adaptations to the world of rationing, separation, and loss. Christmas was a difficult time for many, but people strove to make it a special time and to include that extra special Christmas dinner. The armed services made an attempt to make the Christmas meal special, as you can see by this menu for a Navy ship on Christmas 1944. From clear tomato bouillon through turkey and ham with all the stuffing and potatoes, to the end with pie, fruitcake, hard candies, and cigarettes. But things were a little bit different back home. Here, the boys abroad are wondering, what's cooking at home? And honestly, the cooks at home were also wondering too, because rationing was still on. And how much was rationed depended on shortages. The system was very complicated. Both consumers and grocers faced red tape, including coupons, certificates, stamps, stickers, a changing point system. And it all began with sugar in May of 1942. There were posters from the government to help you with dealing with ration. As other items besides sugar were rationed, these included processed goods such as canned, jarred, dried, frozen, and bottled products, followed by meat, fish, and dairy items. 2 ration books were distributed to each man, woman, and child. One contained blue coupons for processed goods, and the other contained red coupons for meat, fish, and dairy products. Each person started with 48 blue points and 64 red points each month. Thus, the shopper for a family of 4 had a total of 192 points for processed food and 256 points for meat, fish, and dairy products. Each ration product had points that were independent of the cost. The point value could also fluctuate. Thus, a scarce can of beans might have a point value of 14 points, while a more plentiful can of corn might have a value of only 8. By 1944, constantly evolving regulations resulted in a simplified plan that, among other things, finally introduced tokens that could be given as change. Next. Christmas dinner wasn't quite as elaborate as it had been before the war. Rationing of sugar and butter meant fewer sweets. Meat, including ham, was rationed. Although turkey wasn't rationed, the armed services worked hard to provide turkey dinners to the servicemen overseas, which did mean fewer turkeys on the home front. Here we have a suggested menu from the Ignacio Chieftain. And you will notice that pork roast is the suggested meat entree. Now, the government tried to help with publications such as this. You will see here there were several mock dishes in this wartime publication. And the recipes called for only 3 ounces, which would have been about a half a cup of sugar. The Ministry of Food also made this suggestion. A Christmassy sparkle is easy to add to sprigs of holly and evergreen for use on puddings. Dip your greenery in a strong solution of Epsom salts, and when it dries, it will be beautifully frosted. This Safeway ad is where we really see what was happening on Christmas of 1944. The prices don't seem to be too much, but consider the dollar of 1944 would be the equivalent of $17.84 today. The minimum wage was 30 cents an hour, and the average wage was 90 cents an hour. And white collar wages were from $24 to $29 a week. So groceries were expensive of what was available, even though people did have money. And then you had to factor in the points that were needed for rationing. Butter here was 49 cents a pound and 30 points. Cranberries, a pound can was 20 cents with 40 points. Figs were only 14 cents. But had 40 points. Round steak was 37 cents a pound with 13 points. There were no prices listed for turkey, but the ad does show they were available with new assortment, small sizes. Fruitcake was very much a part of the tradition that was trying to be maintained. And you could make your own, as this recipe from the Durango Herald Democrat indicates. Spry in this recipe is a brand of vegetable shortening produced by Lever Brothers and was in competition with Procter & Gamble's Crisco. Pecans for the fruitcake were 30 cents for a 4-ounce package, which meant if you were working for minimum wage, you were working an hour for pecans in your fruitcake. Now, if you didn't bake your fruitcake, you could actually get one from here, the New York Bakery, at $1 a pound. Sizes of 1 pound, 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds, or 5 pounds were available. There was a shortage of alcoholic beverages because not only was sugar rationed, but 100 gallons of alcohol were needed to make just one 18-inch shell. Also, it had been discovered that a better grade of butadiene used to make synthetic rubber was more economically made from alcohol than other materials formerly used. But as these two Durango Herald Democrat ads show, there were still some spirits to help make spirits right.
And finally, a note on Christmas music.
Along with special foods and festive decorations, music is an important part of the holiday season. Durango shoppers could purchase records and sheet music by mail order or at High Grade Stores, Inc., located at 934 Main. City directories show that High Grade was an automotive supply store, but with rationing of automotive supplies, it appears they diversified their inventory. They advertised the largest selection of Christmas cards and Christmas music ever to be shown in Durango. And for your gift-giving needs, the most popular non-holiday songs at this time of year in 1944 were I'm Making Believe by Ella Fitzgerald, Don't Fence Me In by Bing Crosby and the Andrews Sisters, and the wistful I'll Be Seeing You. Locally, the most popular singers were Tommy Dorsey with Frank Sinatra, the Pied Pipers, Bing Crosby, Fats Waller, and assorted classical artists. But traditional Christmas carols, of course, were part of many celebrations. But many of today's beloved classic songs had their roots in the 1940s. Happy Holiday, also released as Happy Holidays, and White Christmas, both written by Irving Berlin, and I'll Be Home for Christmas and Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas were all popular in 1944. In fact, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers released a list in 2014 of the top 30 most performed holiday songs of all time. 1/3 were written in the 1940s. The lyrics of these songs were not overly patriotic or full of can-do spirit, but they were filled with quiet introspection and longing. According to the Guinness Book of World Records, White Christmas is the world's best-selling single. It was initially released in 1941, but was all but lost in the flurry that was Pearl Harbor and its aftermath. The song got another chance in 1942 in the movie Holiday Inn. It was not expected to be a breakout hit, but sales of both records and sheet music proved to be strong. Songwriter Irving Berlin once said that White Christmas was not only the best song I ever wrote, it's the best song anyone ever wrote. Crosby's nephew recounted that Bing would often recall performing White Christmas at a USO show in northern France with Bob Hope and the Andrews Sisters. It was an outdoor show, and he recalled singing to thousands of GIs with tears streaming down their faces as he struggled not to break down himself. The memory was all the more poignant as later many of those soldiers would be lost in the Battle of the Bulge. I'll Be Home for Christmas was recorded by Bing Crosby in 1943 and released as a single. His version, recorded on the Kraft Music Hall program, was released on a V-disc by the U.S. War Department. It was the most requested song at USO shows and earned Bing his 5th gold record. The BBC banned the song as they thought that the sad lyrics and melancholy tone would be bad for morale. Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas was written in 1943 for the movie Meet Me in St. Louis. It was released as a single by Judy Garland. It makes no mention of the war, but it touches on the era's experience of separation, loss, melancholy, and fate. She performed the song for servicemen at the Hollywood Canteen, often bringing many to tears. Bing Crosby's dedication to those who were serving during World War II was remarkable. He did not wine and dine with the brass, but ate in the chow halls with the soldiers. His service to the USO caused the GI magazine Yank to note that he accomplished more for military morale than anyone else of that era. On the December 21st, 1944 episode of his popular weekly radio program, Kraft Music Hall, Crosby had a few things to say after performing a typically tender version of Silent Night. And so I leave you with the words of Bing himself.
Literally on that note, thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, now's the time for those online. If you can't get in the Q&A, go ahead and type them in the chat. I've opened the chat up. Or raise your little hand and we'll allow you to unmute and talk. This is another kind of generic Christmas card that was used in 1944 that service people could use to send back home. So I'm watching for questions. I don't see any. At last, some shameless self-promotion. The museum will be closed Christmas Day and New Year's Day, but we'll be open otherwise. So if you want to bring your holiday visitors by to learn about our amazing history here in La Plata County, we'd be glad to have you. Next month, join us on Saturday, January 11th at 1 p.m. for our second Saturday seminar series. We're cashing in our rain check, and Bev Rich of the San Juan County Historical Society will be with us to talk about the history of hydropower in Silverton. And we'll get more details soon, and same thing, we'll have it in the classroom, and also you can register for Zoom. The link's not up there yet, but it'll be on our website in a few days. Otherwise, we're going to go have a Christmas party. Hope everyone has a wonderful holiday.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
To keep up with us, join us. La Plata County Historical Society members get access to our online catalog database. Visit our website for more resources. Subscribe to our e-blast. Follow us on Facebook. Like us on Instagram. And if you would like to see continued programming like this, be sure to hit the donate button every once in a while on our website. We appreciate your support. Thank you for joining us today. And again,
Merry Christmas. Oh, 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 oh.